on the 30th of June. Since then, swift actions have been taken to implement this very important piece of legislation, including, first, establishment of a committee for safeguarding national security of the Hong Kong SAR, which held its first meeting yesterday. I was in the chair of this committee. It was also attended by the National Security Advisor appointed by the central government, Mr. Violating. We have also established specialized enforcement and prosecution departments, respectively, in the Hong Kong Police Force and the Department of Justice. We have also appointed key personnel, including the National Security Committee Secretary General, Mr. K.K. Chan, and the head of the Police National Security Department, Ms. Edwina Lau, as well as the first batch of designated judges at the magistracy level in order to handle a first case of offense brought under the law. We have made relevant implementation rules for the police to use or to carry out the 7 measures in Article 43 of the National Security Law yesterday, which takes effect today. On the part of the central government, they have approved the setting up of the CPG Office for Safeguarding National Security in the Hong Kong SAR, headed by Mr. Zheng Yanxiong, and also the appointment of the National Security Advisor that I have just mentioned. I want to reiterate that this is a very important piece of legislation, and the central government has placed full trust and faith in the Hong Kong SAR. So the Hong Kong SAR government will vigorously implement this law, and I forewarn those radicals not to attempt to violate this law or crossing the red line, because the consequences of breaching this law are very serious. Now, the law has been in effect for 1 full week. I would like to give a consolidated response and to clarify some misrepresentations or misperceptions. But let me first say that given this is a piece of national legislation and the way that this legislation has been enacted is different. It's different from the local legislation, the process. So it is only understandable that people in Hong Kong, they have some concerns, they have some queries about the content of this piece of legislation and also its implementation. So we will do our utmost to explain to the people of Hong Kong what this law is all about. What this law is all about is very simple. It aims to prevent, curb, and punish 4 types of acts and activities that will endanger national security of the country and also, of course, in Hong Kong. It only targets a very small minority of people who breach the law. At the same time, it will protect the overwhelming majority of Hong Kong citizens in exercising their legitimate rights and freedoms. I'm pleased to say that in the last few days, I noticed, you may dispute that, but I noticed that there has been an increasing appreciation of the positive effect of this national security legislation, particularly in restoring stability in Hong Kong, as reflected by some of the market sentiments in recent days. Surely, this is not doom and gloom for Hong Kong. I'm sure with the passage of time and efforts and the facts being laid out, confidence will grow in 1 country, 2 systems and in Hong Kong's future. Now, let me try to respond to several areas of concerns or unfounded allegations. Allegation number 1 is this law signifies the death of 1 country, 2 systems, or this very important principle is now being put in jeopardy. The answer from me is exactly the opposite. The national security law aims to affirm and improve the implementation of 1 country, 2 systems by addressing risks of undermining national security, which is a matter within the purview of the central government. Enacting national security legislation to protect sovereignty, territorial integrity, and unity is invariably the power and duty of the state in all countries. 1 country is the foundation of 2 systems, and this foundation will be seriously shaken if territorial integrity is being compromised and national security is put at risk. This is a red line which should be very familiar to many of us, and it should not be crossed. Given the escalating national security risks that we have seen since June last year, and the inability of the Hong Kong SAR, not just the government, but also the Legislative Council, to enact local legislation, the central government has to take resolute actions to safeguard the country's interest and to preserve one country, two systems. By the same token, in discharging the central government's responsibility over national security, the national security law provides for the setting up of a CPG office on national security in Hong Kong and reserving for the central government jurisdiction to handle offences under very specified circumstances. And I believe these specified circumstances will be rare and through a very clear approval mechanism. These are all legitimate acts of the central government to fulfill the one country requirement under the principle of one country, two systems. The second allegation is this piece of law is very draconian and it will undermine people's freedoms and spread fear amongst Hong Kong citizens. Well, first of all, I have not seen a widespread of fears amongst Hong Kong people in the last week. And my response is, as some of the legal experts have commented in the past few days, this national security law is actually relatively mild as far as national security laws are concerned. First, its scope is very defined and confined. It only deals with 4 types of acts and activities endangering national security. And the offences are clearly defined in law. The legal principles that we attach a lot of importance to, like presumption of innocence and no retrospective effect and so on, they are being upheld. The law respects and protects human rights as provided for under the Basic Law and relevant provisions in the 2 international covenants as applied to Hong Kong. So I would submit that instead of undermining people's freedom, the national security law will restore stability and helps ensure the great majority of Hong Kong people could exercise their rights and freedoms without being intimidated or attacked. So instead of spreading fear, the law actually remove fear and let Hong Kong people return to a normal, peaceful life. And Hong Kong will resume her status as one of the safest cities in the world. Our respect and protection of human rights is also demonstrated in the making of those detailed implementation rules that we announced yesterday and took effect today. The rules were made by the Chief Executive together with the National Security Committee at its inaugural meeting yesterday, and they laid down very clear processes, prerequisites, and authorizations before the police in the National Security Department can resort to the measures and power under Article 43 of the law. Finally, the third allegation is any national security law should be enacted in Hong Kong by the Legislative Council and not drafted in secret in Beijing, even keeping the Hong Kong SARG and the Chief Executive in the dark. My response is, first, this is a piece of national law concerning matters outside of Hong Kong's high degree of autonomy. It's like defense and foreign affairs. Secondly, it is in line with Basic Law Article 18, which provides for the listing of national laws to Annex 3 and then promulgate for implementation in the Hong Kong SAR. Third, I have to admit that by now it should be wishful thinking for us to expect LegCo, in the current political climate, to pass any national security law. Fourth, the NPC is the highest organ of power in the People's Republic of China and has the authority to enact laws on national security, just like any other governments all over the world. And fifthly, the NPC Standing Committee, in preparing the draft legislation under delegated authority, has actually listened to views expressed by many people and has taken into account Hong Kong's actual situation. Specifically, the National People's Congress Standing Committee has listened to views of the Chief Executive, that is myself, and Hong Kong SAR government key officials several times and taken on board our suggestions. Therefore, it is much regretted that my comment made on the 23rd of June in this forum, in response to a media inquiry, that the Hong Kong SARG has not seen complete details of the proposed legislation, was misrepresented or deliberately exaggerated as Hong Kong SARG being totally kept in the dark. That is not the truth. Finally, in the days ahead, I and my senior colleagues will continue to explain the provisions in the law and put in place effective enforcement mechanisms. We will also enhance publicity and school education to better Hong Kong people's understanding of this important piece of legislation so that they will not be misled. This afternoon, the Secretary for Justice and the Secretary for Security and their colleagues will attend Legislative Council joint panel meeting to answer any members' questions. 睇下大家有咩提問。
Please raise your hands and then please identify your organization before you ask questions. On the left there, the gentleman.
Good
morning, Mr. Lam. I'm from Wenwei Power. Two questions. First, for the implementation rules just gazetted, it spells out the powers of the National Security Department of the Hong Kong Police Force. Do you think there is enough to address the concerns of the public? Second question, many government officials have been docked online.